Go. Thank you, Kayla. All right, as I was saying, great to meet everybody. My name is Meg Zabrowski. I'm a product marketer here at Scribe, and I am joined by my two amazing colleagues, Morgan and Kayla. Morgan is our head of security here at Scribe. This is her wheelhouse. She's got tons of good stuff to share with you all, so I'm excited for that. And we're also joined by Kayla, who leads our customer success group here. So if you're joining us from one of our enterprise customers, Kayla will definitely be a friendly face. So what are we going to cover today? So we'll start with just an overview of why security matters for those who might be very familiar with this topic or less familiar, just get everyone on the same page. Morgan will share how Scribe supports your security needs. And then we'll be spending the bulk of today actually doing an overview of our security tools and a couple of demos of what you can do today to protect any secure or sensitive information. We hopefully will have some good chunk of time at the end for questions. If you have questions as Morgan's going, however, please just drop them in the chat. We can pause her and have her answer them while the topic is still fresh. So with that, I will pass it off to the woman of the hour, Morgan.
Thanks so much for the intro, Meg. So when you're using Scribe, it may not be totally clear how or why security would matter when you're working with a knowledge content sharing platform like Scribe. So if we think about it from the perspective of what Scribe actually does and how we're able to automatically generate how-to guides for you, the tool is actually taking screenshots and collecting keystrokes as you're navigating through your systems after you press record. So this is completely user-enabled recording, but at the same time, you may not be aware as a user that some of the systems that you're working with may have customer data in them. If you're in a regulated industry, they may even have regulated data in them, like healthcare companies that are subject to HIPAA, public schools that are subject to FERPA, or companies in Europe subject to GDPR, all those kinds of things. Then beyond that, some of the systems that you're working with may have trade secrets in there, especially if there's something like a custom developed proprietary system that you're using. And you may want to ensure that your scribes aren't set to public and your competitors can come across and just view what your internal systems look like by stumbling across these how-to guides. So basically what this all flows into is the principle of data minimization. And this is common across all of these industry standards I mentioned for confidentiality and privacy, as well as for protecting your proprietary trade secrets. We want to empower you to make sure that you're sharing the minimum amount of data possible in your scribes to allow them to still be useful while protecting any sensitive data that may be displayed while you're recording a scribe. So Meg, if you can go to the next slide. We have a two-pronged approach to how we address these security needs. So the first is, what do we do internally at Scribe to protect your data when it's hosted in our cloud environment? And the second is, what features do we give you as the user to go ahead and self-regulate what type of data is shown in your scribes? So when it comes to our internal security infrastructure, this is something that we take very seriously. We are independently SOC 2 audited to ensure that our security standards are up to par. And what we do with the actual screenshots and the keystrokes is, first of all, everything that you share with us is encrypted. It's stored in a private data store, a private cloud environment. And the encryption essentially means that even if an unauthorized actor were to somehow gain access to that system, they still wouldn't be able to view the data because it's encrypted. Think of the encryption as like a lock on a lockbox, and the data store is the lockbox. And then the encryption is the actual padlock. Then beyond that, we have automated intrusion detection and prevention systems. These look for anomalistic behavior, so unusual access, unusual actions in access, like exporting data, those kinds of things. And they push alerts to our 24/7 on-call engineers. We also log everything that anyone does in the cloud environment. So that would be Scribe employees, like software engineers who actually work in the cloud environment. They all have a unique ID. They are all monitored. And this all funnels down to extremely controlled access control measures that are all centralized at Scribe and all monitored and audited. Now, you can trust that once your data lands with us, it is secure. But what about your concerns about, well, if I want my scribes to be set to public so anybody with the link can view them, how do I make sure that there's not excessive amounts of sensitive data shown in them? That's where our features come in. So we offer service tiers across all of them that have different types of data redaction, and we'll be demoing that and showing you how to best use it during this webinar. We also offer team-based governance to limit folks who can view scribes within your own environment and break up your scribe workspace so that some folks can view just what they need to view, but not anything else, even internally to your company. We empower our customers to self-administer access. We don't do that for you. We allow you to choose who has access to your environment and what type of permissions they're given. And then we also allow your administrators to control their sharing permissions as well as your users so that you make the informed decision for just how public is the data in my scribe. So Meg, if you can go to the next slide. We'll start by showing you our redaction tools. Now we have 3 different kinds of redaction. They're different across our paid service tiers between Pro and Enterprise. The first is manual redaction. Then we also offer the ability, and this is a new custom developed feature by our engineers, we also offer Smart Blur now. And Smart Blur allows your users to just blur information as they're recording a scribe. And then we also have our enterprise level security feature, which is automated redaction that we call Smart Privacy Screen. So we'll dive into what use cases would make each of these appropriate and what is going to be the best fit for you and your needs later in this webinar. And if you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat as we go through it.
Morgan, thank you so much for outlining everything. And we have so much confidence around what Scribe is doing behind the scenes, how it's architected to keep our data secure. But let's bring this to life for our users. So someone creating scribes, when using Scribe on a daily basis, what are some of these things that we can do to keep the data secure the way we want to? So here's a scenario that I've come across multiple times with customers, with users of Scribe. So someone will ask, say my scribes are frequently, they include a lot of sensitive information, like someone who is recording a scribe in their medical billing system. Their scribe might be how to run a report on outstanding invoices. So we know from what you mentioned, this sounds like sensitive data. It's got invoice data. It's a medical billing system. So maybe it's got some patient or customer data that's also protected. Can you show us, how could I quickly make sure as someone creating a scribe that I'm in compliance and my scribe does not include PII?
Absolutely. So what I would recommend for a use case where you're frequently working with systems that display sensitive information, and there's a variety of different types, is our Smart Blur feature. So if I go ahead and enable recording of the scribe, and let's navigate to something that has a lot of like names, email addresses, let's go ahead and navigate to something like LinkedIn. So what I would do as the user, I would want to minimize the amount of time I would have to spend redacting everything. And I would want to ensure that I'm not, risking the fact that I myself may miss something in the screenshot that I want to be redacted. So I would want an automated tool like Smart Blur. Now, Smart Blur, you can see it has some default settings that you can just toggle and select. And you can see on my screen that as I toggle these on, more and more data disappears. So I can see live what exactly I'm going to be redacting and what my screenshots are going to look like. Now, let's say that I am a medical biller and I need all the patient information scrubbed while I'm trying to record a scribe to show somebody how to use my billing system. So then I'm going to want to get rid of something like names, email addresses, that kind of data that can tie a patient identity to the data that's on my screen. Then the other advantage is if you're a company that has proprietary systems with trade secrets and you just don't want that text out there, you can also get rid of long form text, and it'll get rid of things like paragraphs that may have data scattered within them. And we also offer precision blur. So if I select choose others, see how when I hover over an element or a section of my screen, that data disappears. I can just pick what exactly I want to redact. So now let me go ahead and toggle a couple more categories on. And then we'll go ahead and do a search and put together a workflow so that we can get some data in here. So let's say you want to show your coworker how to refine their search for a specific type of group in LinkedIn. So you've shown them how to filter by group, and then we're going to go ahead and complete the recording. And you can see that the Smart Blur feature, everywhere that I clicked, that blur carried through. So the other advantage of Smart Blur for this purpose is the fact that you have several options when it comes to how exactly you blur. You can use the presets and you can select your own data, so it gives you a lot of control. The other piece that's nice is that since you can see the whole screen and watch the blur happening live, it's actually visible to you what you're redacting before you finish recording the scribe. So that's why this is good for folks who are working with systems that have a lot of that data, because you can just set it and forget it and go about recording your scribe.
That is so amazing. That's going to save so much time. I'm really excited for this new feature. Let's touch on another scenario that comes up a lot with our users. I'm sure folks here can relate to this. I'm recording something in maybe a not terribly sensitive system, or it's not terribly sensitive. The audience I'm intending for is let's say I'm recording something in HubSpot on how to update opportunities for my team of sales reps. So the information in there is something they have access to, they can see it, it's not sensitive in that regard, and actually seeing a lot of it is helpful. But maybe there's a few things, like I'm using an example opportunity and I don't want the details of that to be visible in my scribe. Protect a little bit of privacy. How can I do that in the best way?
So what I would recommend, if there's just some very specific data and there's also not a lot of it that you need to go back and redact, so we don't need to worry about a ton of time savings or time loss with this, I would recommend our manual redaction. Now, manual redaction and the Smart Blur both come with our Pro service tier. And so you can see that what I would do here is I would edit the scribe, I would click on edit image, and then I can just draw boxes around everything that I want redacted. Now, what's nice about this manual redaction is that, and you'll see once I click done here, that this image takes a bit to process. The reason why it takes a few seconds to process is because it's a full data overwrite in our database. So that means when you manually redact, every image that's in both our production and our backup database is redacted all the way through, which is nice for compliance purposes because some companies will only put a blur over the text in the production database and then they still have the unredacted image stored somewhere. We don't do that, so this can't be reverse engineered.
That's amazing. So we get flexibility and all of those benefits.
Yes, and it works best for processes where you don't have a ton of data that you need to redact, since it is a manual process, but you can trust once it's redacted, it's not recoverable.
Love it. Okay, let's talk about a third scenario, which comes up often with our enterprise customers, that maybe as a central system administrator, like someone at a healthcare company, they're responsible for making sure that the company, the scribes within the company, don't expose PHI or sensitive data, both to vendors and in the scribes that are being created. But these are, of course, critical processes. We want to have scribes for them. We want to be able to record them with Scribe and create these guides that help the team so much. So as an enterprise IT administrator, what's something that I can use? What's a great feature that will help me control this, have confidence, and allow our end users to get the most out of the application?
Sure. So in this case, I would recommend our Smart Privacy screen, which only comes with our highest service tier, Enterprise. And a few of the trigger points for when enterprise makes sense is the fact that, if you recall, with Smart Blur and manual redaction, those are both user enabled. So those would be your end users, your employees who are turning off and on that redaction or manually redacting it. And then Smart Blur is an automatic process, which will save you time, but it does only work with our browser plugin because it's custom developed. When it comes to enterprise, Smart Privacy screen works with both the browser plugin and the desktop. It's fully managed by your enterprise administrator, so your employees cannot change the settings. And so what you would do as an administrator of a company with regulated data is you would navigate to our enterprise administration panel. If you see this option down here that says SPS config, this is how you configure the automated redaction for enterprise. And you can see I've got over 100 categories of data that I, as the administrator, can toggle off and on, including name, gender, passport number, credit card number, healthcare identification number, and even technical data like HTTP cookies. And this goes all the way down to by country. So each country has their own identification number system. So this is also great for jurisdictional regulations like GDPR or CPRA. Now that we have some of these categories toggled on as the administrator, if we navigate back and we go to record a scribe, and again, if we navigate to something like LinkedIn, that's going to have lots of names. You can see, let's say that we're just searching for a coworker or a colleague, and we filter by people. And then we go ahead and we click complete the recording. If you see all these gray boxes that are covering up some of the names and images, I didn't have to do anything to put that there as the end user recording the scribe. That happened automatically. The other thing that's really nice about this redaction happening automatically is that it's actually a background process on your local machine for my more technically inclined folks. And what that means is that it's running on your computer. So this isn't redaction that happens after the image touches our servers. This happens before it ever lands in our environment. That's important for my healthcare folks on the phone, because if you recall with HIPAA is as soon as the image is transmitted to your vendor's server, it's considered shared with them. So this keeps that sharing from ever taking place and keeps everything redacted before it ever exits your own corporate environment. So this is great. Where enterprise is a good fit is if you need that centralized administrator control. You are subject to data privacy regulations. And if you have hundreds of categories of sensitive data, that would be very time consuming to go back and manually redact. And if you need redaction, both for desktop applications like an EHR, for example, and for browser plugin.
Amazing. Our healthcare folks and our system admins are going to be sleeping easy knowing about that one.
That's right. And then, so beyond that, there's a question of, well, what other security features? Because it's great if I can just control the data that's ending up in my scribes when I'm sharing them with other folks. But I'm sure my IT admins on the line are thinking, well, what about which users can access which scribes? What about authentication? What about our employees being able to just share these scribes wherever they want? Can we trust that the redaction is going to flow through our employees? If we're just using smart blur or manual redaction, can we trust that they actually are getting rid of all of that data? So we have some additional security features to help support these kinds of requirements that are in the enterprise administration panel. If these questions are of interest, this is where I would strongly recommend enterprise over our other service tiers, because there are several options that you have. So for example, let's say that you work at a company where you have a proprietary system you developed. So your software engineers need to record scribes to teach people how to use this system. But then you also have your own internal HR department, and you don't want them to be able to access that system. Or for my government agencies, they may not even have the clearance to view the system. You can break your employee base up into different teams with enterprise. So you could do team A as HR, team B as my software engineers, and you can provision teams and appoint team level administrators and add team members. You can make it so that these folks can only view their own scribes, so they won't be able to view each other's. The other thing that kind of goes hand in hand with our team-based administration is we have role-based access control, and beyond just the creator and admin for our pro service tier, you get custom roles with enterprise. So if I want a team administrator who can manage the HR department's content and scribes and users, but I don't want them to be able to also administrate the IT department scribe account or their scribe team, I can create team-based administrators and a super admin who can tinker with these settings across all of them. I can also enable things like end users and viewers who may be able to just create documents but can't do anything else. So that's where our role-based access control also fits in with access to that data and that information. Now, when I mentioned limiting sharing of scribes to just your team, this is where you can control that as the administrator. So if you're a company that has either trade secrets or sensitive data, and you only want folks within your scribe organization to be able to view your data, you can set both the default so that it defaults to just within your organization, and the maximum so that your users themselves cannot change the Scribe share setting to shareable with link. They can only share it with the organization. Then if you're the team case that I mentioned, where some departments should be able to view, but other departments shouldn't be able to view certain scribes, you can make scribes visible only to each other's team members. Then additionally, for authentication, to make sure the folks landing in your Scribe account are actually who they say they are, we offer with enterprise single sign-on integration. So my folks out there using Okta, using OneLogin, using anything like that, can go ahead and set up that custom single sign-on integration to make sure that everybody is appropriately authenticated. So those are some additional features that we give to enterprise administrators to ensure that you're protecting your data and your own Scribe environment with folks logging in.
Awesome, Morgan. That was amazing. Thank you for that. There's a few questions that came in through the chat that we can get to now. And of course, as people have more questions, please, you can either DM them directly to me or just put them out to everyone, which we'll start with, and apologies if I'm mispronouncing your name, but Tabo's question, which Kayla just answered to, but if you wanted to speak to it out loud for the rest of the group, his question is, if I am running 2 consecutive sessions, how can I prevent users for the following week from seeing this week's data or lab?
So if I'm understanding the question correctly, you're thinking, how can I prevent users who are getting access to Scribe in the next week from viewing the previous scribes? So what
Yes.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
What I would recommend there is actually our team-based governance is going to be your best approach. So if you have like a chronological timeline where you're adding people who are on a certain project in one week and then a different project the next week, I would break it up by creating a team and setting your sharing permissions so that it can only be shared with the team, and adding the users for that week's project to that team, and then for the next week's project to a different team. The other thing is you can share scribes across teams if you need to. As the administrator, you can go in and change that setting so that it's duplicated to a team if you would like. So that way you don't have to go back and re-record scribes every time.
Yeah, no, this one's will be pretty much the same labs, and so we're running them consecutively, and want to make sure that next week's people, once I give them access to the same lab that the folks are running this week, are not going to go in and say, oh, let me see what the labs look like, and try to go ahead and then mess up the some of the data within the labs. So
Gotcha.
So it looks like a team-based, setting would be, the appropriate thing to do.
Yeah, I agree. That'd be the best approach. And if they don't need access to the scribes anymore, you can also add remote users based on a time frame. Also, I think we have a chainsaw in somebody's background. If folks could go on mute.
Oh, that's me. My neighbors are constructing.
But yeah, what I would recommend there is that team-based approach, or adding and removing if they just no longer need access.
All right, apologies for the background noise, but question from Sophia. I am a consultant and I document client projects using Scribe. At the moment, I send these as PDFs, but it would be great to share to their Scribe environment or straight to their login. Is this possible?
Yes. So Kayla has extensive experience with this, so I'm going to let Kayla jump in here as well. But there are 2 different approaches that we see for our consultants. This is a common use case that we're starting to see. We'd either recommend you could do the team-based approach where you give your clients each a different team environment. And we have sometimes when folks just have lots of different clients, there will even be separate Scribe organizations for clients. And if Kayla, you want to speak to which option is best, that'd be great.
Yeah, Morgan, you just covered it. Sophia, great question. We would also recommend teams for this. So setting up separate teams, again, in either under your organization or a separate organization would be the best way to share scribes between them. It could even be in a free team. Your clients, you could share from an upgraded account to a free team for folks just to be able to log in and view them. I think that's a really great solution depending on how much content and if you're primarily pushing it out one way. And then your clients can leverage the workspace, can leverage the library. And there's a few additional things you can do, as Morgan mentioned, if there's more security requirements and things you want to impose that Morgan showed earlier, that would fall under the enterprise umbrella. And again, we can leverage multiple teams and some really cool solutions there.
Great. All right, question from Lisa. Is there a way to blur after you have created a scribe?
Yes, I'll actually go ahead and share my screen and show you how to do that. So what I would recommend if you're wanting to blur after you've created the scribe, it's maybe more appropriate to say redact, because smart blur can only be enabled while or right before you're recording the scribe. But let's say that you saw that some data landed in a scribe that you didn't want to be there. You could go ahead and navigate to that scribe, click edit scribe, and then scroll to your image that has data in there that you don't want in there, and click redact forever, and then just manually get rid of that data.
Great, thanks, Morgan. All right, we are short on time, so I did just want to get to one person's question, which was around they're a free user at the present moment, working on their team to or their company to upgrade them to pro. Morgan, do you have any best practices on how they could do their best to limit sensitive data when they're recording scribes?
Absolutely. If you're a free user and you don't have access to the redaction tools and the smart blur that come with our pro service tier, what I would recommend doing is essentially just working with dummy data when you're recording scribes. Or what you could do is when you create a scribe, make sure that you just don't set it to public so that it's not going outside of yourself or your organization. And then if you want to share it with your coworkers without having to change the sharing settings so that it's no longer private, I'd recommend a workaround where you export as PDF and just send that scribe to just your coworkers or those folks in your organization.
Awesome. All right, Morgan, question on smart blur. Looks like it applies some blurring effect over the data. Is that all that goes on with smart blur? Is there any way that people out there could reverse engineer that?
Yeah, I can tell that whoever submitted that question is very privacy minded and tech savvy. So the context of the blurring question is that blurring is commonly able to be reverse engineered very easily. What our team did with their custom developed smart blur technology is that not only does it put the blur over the image and before the image is actually transmitted to our server, it also scrambles the text underneath. So even if somebody were to be able to remove the blur, the text underneath would be nonsensical and they wouldn't be able to figure out what it actually said.
Awesome. And Luke just asked, does smart blur work with the desktop app?
Smart blur does not work with the desktop application. That's why for folks who need to redact with the desktop app or have sensitive information in desktop apps that they use Scribe for, we recommend enterprise and going for a smart privacy screen.
Great. All right. That brings us to time. I'll just finish this, Morgan, with a softball. Are there any resources that we'll send or people can find about our position on security?
Sure. So we like to drink our own champagne at Scribe. So we have pages that we can send your way, laying out all of this information about how to best configure Scribe for maximum security. And beyond that, we've got our security page and our privacy page that are on our website that you can easily access and look into all these different features and security settings that we offer.
Great. All right. Well, on that note, thank you, everybody. This was awesome. Thank you, Morgan, for sharing your expertise and all the good things that we're trying to do over here to protect your sensitive data and your security. Thank you, Kayla, for joining us, and to all of our amazing users for spending these 30 minutes with us. If you have any questions, you can always reach out to me. Morgan's always available, or Kayla as well, by email. So thanks, everybody, and hope you have a great rest of your day or evening. Bye.
Thanks.